Hi, I hope you're well. In this one, I've got 5 quick tips that'll help you get the best from your tracksaw or plunge saw and get those precise and consistently clean cuts. And if you're new to tracksaws, do check out my Tracksaw Workshop series of videos where I take you through the setup of an entry-level saw right out of the box. So tip number 1, look after your guardrails, but particularly your splinter guards, those skinny little rubber or plasticky strips on the edge of your guardrails. They're the key, not just to clean, splinter-free and chip-free cuts in your workpiece, but accurate cuts too, as they represent where the cut line will be. When you get a new rail, you snug your saw onto it with the cams on the saw and then trim the splinter guard back. You literally cut through it. Of course, over time, with the blade rubbing up against it with every cut, it'll wear away and need to be replaced as it won't be accurate anymore. The same thing happens when you change blades as well. And one trick you can do is to peel back the splinter guard and move it out a little bit and then retrim it. You can do that a couple of times, but don't push it too far. Eventually, you'll have to pony up and buy a new one. I prefer these Makita style black rubber splinter guards to the Festool translucent ones. That's just a personal preference, as much down to my eyesight as everything. Plus you can buy a 3-meter length of the Makita style rubber strip for about 10 or 12 pounds. Links in the description as always. Tip number 2 is all about trimming that splinter guard back, and if you're a new tracksaw user, then trimming the splinter guard is probably going to be the first cut you'll make, and arguably the most important. No pressure there. It's the most important because it needs to precisely represent where the cut will be. It's better to have the splinter guard fully supported as you cut through it. An offcut or spoiler board is ideal, but just a cardboard box on the bench will do. It's just to keep the rail flat and true while you make the cut. The main problem is that you have to hang the saw off the back of the rail in order to make that full-length cut, and this can lead to inaccuracies, especially if you're new to the tool. If you have 2 rails to trim, then a good trick is to join them together with a joining bar, start it in the middle of the lower rail and make the cut all the way to the end. Then swap them around to complete the cut on the other rail. If you have just the one rail, and when I bought my first tracksaw, I worked for years with just one rail, then a piece of scrap or even just cardboard cut to the same width as the rib on the rail and taped to the spoiler board can really help you to keep the saw in line when you make that cut. Bear in mind as well that splinter guards are relatively cheap and really easy to replace, so if you mess one up, it's not a disaster if you need to buy a new one. And talking of buying new stuff, let's consider blades. Blades, of course, next to the splinter guard, literally right next to the splinter guard, are a key part to the quality of your cuts. If you have an entry-level or supermarket saw, then the blade is one of the easiest and cheapest upgrades you can make. In the past, I've recommended the Triton 48 tooth as a solid blade for the money, but I noticed that Johnny Rennie at Rennie Tools also has a range of very well priced blades, so they may also be worth a look as an alternative as well. If you have one of the more premium saws, then the stock blades are generally a pretty good all-rounder, so good actually that it's easy just to leave it on for everything, and that's when you find that your 48 tooth blade really isn't that great for ripping natural timbers, for example, and your saw bogs down and starts to feel underpowered. So pay attention to your blades, replace them ideally before you really need to, keep them clean, get them sharpened or replaced, and keep the tooth count appropriate for what you're cutting. Festool's Panther ripping blade for the TS55, for example, has just 12 teeth, but it still makes a great cut. And they also do a 28 tooth universal blade, which is a really good general purpose blade if you're working on a mix of natural timbers and sheet materials. So we've kept the rails and the blades in good shape. Let's put them together with tip number 4 and get a properly precise cut. You know, even when you're using a mechanical pencil, sometimes you're just not sure which side of a pencil line you need to work to, like 0.7 of a millimeter makes a difference. Unless, of course, if you get 0.7 on one side, then 0.7 of the other, and suddenly you've got 2 workpieces that differ by not much less than the thickness of a door gap, which isn't great. So what I do if I want an accurate cut, and I don't need that very often to be honest, I do go for consistency over accuracy. But what I do is I use a tape measure that has the little leg that sticks out. I've talked about these before. These are Swedish by Talmeter. And I measure that out against a piece of masking tape. I'm using blue tape this time. And I run a square up to the end and then just cut the tape off with a knife at that square. Then you have an exact mark to cut to. There's no subjectivity about which side of the line you need to be on. It is literally clear cut. Now, if your eyes aren't as old as mine, you can probably do away with the tape and just use a marking knife. But at my age and with my eyes, I need all the help I can get, so a piece of tape works great for me. For repeat cuts, of course, you don't want to be doing the tape trick every time. And I showed in a previous video how to use just the square against the tape and then replace the tape with a guide rail. And because you know the splinter guard is truly representative of the cut line, because that's how you've set it up, you know that you're going to get a precise cut. So before we get to the top tip, I just need to fess up to something. I made some cabinets recently for the base cabinet basic series, and I was perfectly happy with them. These are the left and right sides of the double cabinet that I made, and if you take one side and spin it around, you know what? They're not actually square. They don't match. You know what else? It doesn't matter, because it doesn't make any difference as long as I can keep the sides that do match mirrored in this way, and as long as all the other cabinets in the run are all the same, then what's the problem? So my top tip is just to let it go. Seriously, don't let an obsession with precision or squareness or absolute accuracy get in the way of enjoying your woodwork, enjoying what you make. You don't have to have low standards and be easily pleased. Just dial back that natural inclination to overanalyze and over-engineer everything and shoot for consistency and repeatability. Remember, we're making cabinets and bookshelves, not rocket ships and submarines, two things particularly ill-suited to be made from wood, by the way. And I said before that if you're making a cabinet that's 600mm high, most of the time it really doesn't matter if it ends up at 598 or 601, as long as the sides match and you can keep them mirrored and that any other cabinets you make in that run are the same. So there you go, 5 quick tips to Tracksaw happiness. Keep your rails and blades in good shape, be consistent in your measuring and marking, and enjoy what you make. What more could you possibly want? Well, perhaps another video from me maybe, but I'll call this one done for this week. Thanks ever so much for watching, and I'll see you all again very soon. All right, take care.